So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to that rarest of things really, because we have a map that I have never covered before. I'm not even sure when this one was added. I assume it was part of the map packs that occurred like a long time ago at this point, and it was probably part of one of the Harad or Far Eastern ones, because it definitely has that sort of vibe to it, but a very canyony map, a river that runs through it, albeit a drying up river here, and terrain is obviously going to be a massive part of what is ultimately going to be a pitch battle here today, as claiming these superior pieces of terrain is going to be absolutely vital for both sides if they hope to be victorious. And you have to say, based on the layout of both teams, the red team probably has the more uniform start, but the blue team maybe has the advantage when it comes to some of the initial bits of terrain, but it just depends on which of these is going to be better. As far as the theme goes, there isn't really much of a theme, to be honest with you, albeit all of the red team factions are elves, at least partially, with Mirkwood, Dorwinion and Lindon facing off against a rather strange and convoluted alliance of not so much the hobbits and Lothlorien, but Harad being involved on somewhat home turf, you'd have to say, is a little bit peculiar, but Lothlorien leading some sort of bizarre rebellion against their brethren, with some rather unlikely allies in tow, is as close to a theme as we're going to get for this one. But I really wanted to show off a new map, because when I saw this one was part of the maps that Filler here gave me, he gave me a few replays to get through as well, in much the same way that Winged Swordsman has been doing of late. I had to use this one because very often these days, at least for the replays, I'm doing maps that sometimes I maybe haven't shown them for a long time, but ultimately I am familiar with them, whereas this one is all new, so that should be rather interesting. And this is, being a pitch battle, we can start off with the blue team rather than starting off arbitrarily with the defenders. So we'll go off with rather the black sheep on the field today, which is going to be the Harad, the only evil faction, but again they are fighting for their home, so marching alongside unlikely allies in Lothlorien and the hobbits or no. They will be the most motivated army on the field today. They're going to be played by DF Morris. As far as his starting position goes, he does have some good terrain that he can claim, make life a little bit more difficult for Mirkwood to move forward, and also have some parity with Lothlorien here, have this very nice defensive position on these cliffs, which they will need because the hobbits are a little bit further away, and I don't know how all the armies are going to move, but certainly terrain, huge part of this battle. Harad brought some Harad spearmen. I mean, alongside the hobbits, you would have to say that the blue team are going to be significantly the more numerous on this occasion. It just kind of depends on what shape the battle takes. If it turns into a more of a grindy fight in choke points, then having the numbers isn't going to be as useful. But on a pitch battle, you really should be able to make use of superior numbers in some way if you're being creative. So Harad spearmen being the backbone of that. Demons of the Desert could be really devastating against high quality factions like Mirkwood, like any of the elven units they're going to be facing off against really, because one or two volleys is enough to get huge amounts of value, whereas against more numerous factions maybe not so much. But the Demons of the Desert will be vulnerable to the enemy archers as well, so they do have to be a little bit careful also. As will the Southron pikemen. Southron pikemen have got very low stats even for pikes, but the armour piercing does somewhat make up for that. I don't know how useful the armour piercing is going to be here. Only really against the rank and file Dorwinion units will that really come into its own. Against both Mirkwood and Lindon, Harad's general infantry focuses actually won't be as effective as maybe they're used to being against a lot of the more heavily armoured Western Kingdoms of men. But like I said, against the Elvelin, they will still be very useful, and this is the initial little expeditionary force going for a huge amount of cavalry here, so this should be rather interesting. I mean, given the somewhat canyony, hilly nature of the map, cavalry might be fairly difficult to use for Morris, but going for a creative composition like this should make for an interesting fight. 2 units of war beasts is a very expensive thing to bring as well. They're kind of similar to the Bjornings, which I'm sure we'll be seeing from the hobbits, but more difficult to use, very high charge bonuses, but somewhat more fragile than you would like, given their very impressive and scary appearance. We'll have to wait and see though. Again, it's one of those things where if they can get some good charges off into the Elven units, they can get a lot of value very quickly, but if they are kept at arm's length, then they will be a bit of a waste. The Black Serpents, of course, are very speedy, a more user-friendly, perhaps, cavalry unit to use than the War Beasts we've just been talking about. Multiple HP Lancers are very simple, you charge them in and charge them out and rinse and repeat, and the Black Serpents are especially good at this because they are one of the fastest units of cavalry in the game. They do have a trade-off for this though, and that is the fact that against the other really high-end cavalry units, as we saw in the knockout tourney battle that we did between all the cavalry, they do lack a little bit in terms of their overall combat effectiveness there in sustained melee. Standard Serpent Guard, of course, the same principle applies, they're just not as good at what they do as their Black Serpent brethren. Again, single HP cavalry in this version of the game can be useful, it's just the chances of it not being useful are significantly higher. Now, I would hope that in the next patch, when it does eventually come along, this is one of the main things I would want remedied, because it would completely change the meta of the game, especially in pitch battles like this, because this army composition that Morris has brought is very rare, purely because cavalry like this is so difficult to use effectively. And if you do bring it, like very often, one misstep with your cavalry and it completely undoes your entire effort to win the game. So we'll see how Morris does with all of this. And some basic unit of Southron Lance as well. Lower end cavalry like this, especially because their charge bonuses aren't even that impressive. Even the Lancer low end units like this, they really do leave much to be desired. But when they're part of a huge cavalry force like this, maybe with one big alpha strike, they could do tons and tons of damage to a faction like Mirkwood or Lindon. We shall have to wait and see. Southron Raiders can be a bit of an annoyance to the elves, especially seeing as the elves themselves are not brilliant at taking arrow fire, but considering all their archers, they should be able to keep something like the Southron Raiders at bay. And then, of course, down here we also have the mighty Mumakil. Mumakil, another unit actually, which are difficult to use with a high skill ceiling, but they are at least more likely to be used effectively than the basic units of cavalry we've already seen, especially against the elves, because if the Mumakil do decide to use their melee attack animation, they can kill a lot of elves in one swing. Now then, we shall move on to Filler himself's army, who is playing as Lothlorien, already in position with Overwatch on Dorwinion and Mirkwood should they decide to move forward. Watchers of the Golden Wood with their Silverthorn arrows, they are also the most effective aggressive infantry that Lothlorien have, so a very strong multifaceted unit, as we have seen recently in the Helm's Deep Siege. Lothlorien's skirmishers are not to be taken lightly even in melee. So yeah, Watchers of the Golden Wood in a good position. They do also have some units at ground level over here. Loren-Armed Axemen will do very nicely against their fellow elves because they don't rely too heavily on armour, and obviously that higher base damage will be very good against their fellow elves. Some Riders of the Golden Wood as well. This is a much higher tier unit of horse archers, not sword archers. Horse archers than the Southron Raiders that we've already seen. Obviously Silverthorn arrows as well, they are mounted variants of the Watchers that we've already seen after all. More Loren-Armed Axemen, some Woodland Protectors. Javelins will be useful for focusing down individual high priority targets that the enemy elves may decide to bring forwards. Galatharan Blade Masters, again, high base damage units are always going to be the thing that you want against the elves because they don't rely so much on that armour, and you do need a lot of damage to be able to crack through their defensive values. Having said that, a bit of armour piercing won't go amiss. These Loren-Armed Warriors will be ideal for dealing with the human contingent that are in the Dorwinion army. Some Loren-Armed Archers here in support, and the rest of Filler's army taking up a position up here on the high ground. He'll have to be very aware of Dorwinion's presence, with March Wardens here, some Spears of the Wood just for some numbers, more Galatharan Blade Masters, more Spears of the Wood, another unit of March Wardens. So some of the more basic units up here, but a decent defensive position, and he is somewhat flexible in how he can choose to approach this, whether sitting on that hill or maybe moving forward in tandem with Harad. And their final ally over here, the Hobbits, who's a little bit further away and on the other side of the river, the only army to have deployed on this side of the drying up river, is Medexa. Like I said, the Bjornings, which they are more user-friendly than the War Beasts of Harad that we've already seen, but the same principle does apply. As soon as their hit points are expended, they are surprisingly fragile, so Medexa will have to be on the lookout for that, but they're no less deadly anyway. Got some Battling Brandybucks. Again, the Hobbits can't really avoid bringing a glut of armor piercing, to be honest with you. So it is what it is, but it's not going to be completely useless. But they do have the unfortunate task of trying to fight Lindon over on this side primarily, so that armor piercing will be at its least effective. Having said that, the Proudfoot Protectors crossbows, while armor piercing is one of their features, the overall damage they do is still one of the things that they can really bring to bear against Lindon, especially against some of those higher tier units. Pikes in melee as well, a must bring. Very often I would recommend going into the red limit on the Proudfoot Protectors, actually, they are that good. More Battling Brandybucks, the Ents, which if they're deployed at the right time, especially against stuff like Lindon pike blocks, they could be extra effective, and the Hobbits being what they are, tons of their army is going to be hidden, so we're going to be seeing much of what they have reveal itself as the battle goes along. Now then, we shall move on to the red team, who have got a big long line of resistance they can put up against the blue team. Over here we have Jay, who's playing as Lindon, his cavalry wing over here, which, depending on how the hobbits have set up, this cavalry from Lindon could be very effective very early on. Harlenden riders, I mean, hobbits are not the most well armoured, nor are Lindon, but as long as Lindon are the ones loosing their arrows first, that shouldn't be too much of a concern for them. The Harlenden riders themselves also capable of looking after themselves in melee against other cavalry, albeit against the hobbits. The Bjornings are the only such unit you would face. And back here we have the Horse Lords of Ulmo, one of the scarier units of knights that the game has to offer. Again, they do trade in a shield and that armour for a little bit more speed and also a little bit more effectiveness off the charge and in melee. But, you know, again, trade-offs as they are, we should have to wait and see how effective those are. But the differences between the Lance Knights in practical terms is actually relatively minor. 4 Lindon archers are ready. They can of course start the skirmishing against the hobbits. Harlenden infantry, most of the infantry here from Lindon should be effective against the hobbits and should actually be effective as well against Harad should the need arise. It's a little bit of a stickier situation against Lothlorien, but even there it really does depend on what units are facing off against one another. For example, if Lindon can rely on the support of their pikes here, 4 Lindon pikemen, Lothlorien could struggle a little bit, seeing as they only have one such unit and it has not been brought today. Got some 4 Lindon Marines back here in support, some Mithlon Marines, and of course the very scary Noldorin Blade Masters. Fantastic unit of infantry there, and also some Harland infantry and 4 Lindon pikemen. So Jay is fairly thinly spread here. The hobbits could concentrate their forces, especially seeing as to reinforce in some ways he's got some way to march, so I don't know, we'll have to wait and see on that. 4 Lindon archers and 4 Lindon Marines here, but the hobbits could be hyper aggressive and it could pay off for them. We'll have to wait and see. I think actually if they don't do that, then that will actually play into Lindon's hands somewhat. Then we have Farquit, who is playing as Dorwinion, Elvelyn Hammerguard and some Morroquendi bows, as well as some Elvelyn infantry, so I would imagine they're going to try and contest this high ground with Lothlorien immediately. They have the quality to do so, certainly with the Hammerguard, because Lorien don't have any of their really high-end units up there, but unlike with Lindon, they are going to be able to reinforce themselves a little bit more quickly. More Elvelyn infantry, looks like a more human-centric army this, rather interestingly. Elvelyn marksmen are going to be really good in a skirmish fight, even against a force like Lothlorien, because the armour, you know, this sort of bogged down skirmish fighting is exactly the sort of thing that the Elvelyn marksmen are designed for, less so when it comes to elven archers, but the elves, excuse me, are in a superior position, so we'll wait and see. Elvelyn infantry and Morroquendi pikes making up the main line here, and Dorwinion of course have got plenty of units that can hide as well, including cavalry, javelins, and really high-end units like Blade Masters as well. And last, but by no means least, we have Mevin, who is playing as Mirkwood. Several units of spears of Emenduir, several units of blades of Emenduir as well, so perhaps more numbers-heavy Mirkwood army, which may yield results. I mean, it's certainly not typical whenever a player usually plays as the elves. The temptation is always to go quality-centric, but their basic units are still better than the equivalents from other factions, so that means you can be a fairly bulky elven army, at least in terms of your numbers, less so with your armour, and actually still be very effective pound for pound. We shall wait and see. We've got some Hirialth back here and another unit of Hirialth, one with the armour upgrade, the green ones here, and one without, so a little bit of expertise and nothing else that we can see. So the rest of the Mirkwood army, presumably anyway, is hidden, and I think maybe there are pathways that Mirkwood could have deployed in back here, little hidden encampments as well. Maybe this is where they're sequestering their units away, but I do feel as though the battle is going to be very front-loaded, so if Mirkwood have sequestered units away in the back to maybe flank around the enemy, they're going to have to make use of them fairly quickly and maybe not dither with them, but we'll have to wait and see on that. It's only speculation, really, until the battle actually gets underway, and I imagine we won't have to make too much of a cut here because Dorwinion and Lothlorien are so close to one another, so without further ado, let's get this show on the road, shall we? Looking at things from this angle, certainly the vantage point that Lorien have on this hill is fairly substantial when you consider what Dorwinion are going to have to try and accomplish, but it is also worth saying that Lorien don't really have a huge number of units close by to reinforce should Dorwinion really try to push up this hill. I mean, the March Wardens also going to be shooting largely into the bank that's just in front of them, and most of these units that are going to be charging up the hill are Elvelyn, with the Hammerguard in the vanguard as well. These are the sort of units which Lorien really are going to struggle to deal with for the most part. And also we have the Morroquendi bows, so elven quality archers. They may have to shoot up the hill, but certainly this isn't going to be a walk in the park for Lothlorien, in spite of the fact they do have superior positioning here. They are going to need some stronger units unless they wish to pull back. There are some Galatran Blade Masters with that armour upgrade as well, which will be useful, but also not going to be enough considering the Hammer Guard's presence. Plenty of regular Elvelyn infantry as well. Given the lightly armoured nature of these Lothlorien units, Dorwinion will be fancying their chances here. Meanwhile, this is going to be probably where this battle is won and lost. Morroquendi Stalkers being revealed by the Haradrim cavalry, and it is the Harad cavalry which I think is going to make either the positive or negative difference for the blue team here. Purely because if this doesn't work from DF Morris, it's simply so much money that has effectively gone down the drain. But he is charging into the side of all of these Elvalin marksmen here, damage being done. Also with the uncovering of these Morroquendi Stalkers. A little bit messy though with these Hashari Shadows also being caught up in things, but the Morroquendi Stalkers simply being swamped by all of these units of cavalry that have been uncovered. As I mentioned before as well, you can actually see Mirkwood do seem to be taking the long way around, which is all well and good, but it does mean Dorwinion are going to be under quite a lot of pressure. The progress that they make up that hill to try and take that Lorien position is all well and good, but you can also see the stakes being run over by the Mumakil. Something that Harad maybe aren't taking into account here is the fact that there are Morroquendi pikes here, which are going to be good even against the Mumakil, but especially against all of those cavalry units that are charging in. So as messy as they've managed to make things over here, the Haradrim, I don't think Dorwinion need to panic too much yet, as much as they may not enjoy being under this kind of pressure. They should still be able to do the business. Meanwhile, Mumakil moving across. Dorwinion General falling very, very quickly, which is kind of unfortunate given they're only up against Spearmen, but that is the risk you take when you find yourself committing your General as your first unit into the breach. What is going on over here? Lindon riders across the field now. Lindon, the Horse Lords of Ulmo as well. I mean, part of the problem here, of course, is the fact that the Hobbits have got so many hidden units. Bjornings moving across. You can see the Great Eagles have revealed themselves as well, a unit that can hide anywhere. A very unique unit in the fact they only have a charge attack. They don't have any attack in prolonged melee, as it were. Now moving across the river, I mean, surely they're not going to attack into Lindon directly like this, especially not against 4 Lindon pikemen. I guess those are Harland infantry. You could charge into them directly and actually have a pretty good time of it, as long as you don't penetrate so far that you go after the Lindon pikes as well, although that didn't feel like a charge, that felt more like a nudge, and that's not going to be good. With the Great Eagles, they are going to need to retreat. Lindon moving themselves around as well. The Mumakil's still alive actually, but the longer they stand stock still in place against these units, surely that won't continue to be the case. With Mirkwood's reinforcements arriving, you can see the Mirkwood also now up on this high ground and rooting out the Harad cavalry that has found itself all of a sudden very, very limited in number. And really it's just the Southron Raiders and the Mumakil at this point. More of an annoyance than anything else, but it does look as though this attack hasn't had the kind of progress on Dorwinion's part that maybe I thought it would. With Blades of Emondwyr from Mirkwood up here, that may start to turn around a little bit. I think the fact that, you know, those archers over there, the March Wardens, in a perfect position really to hit the backs of all of the Elvalin units that were trying to make progress up the hill initially, is proving to be a pretty significant thing. Galatran Blade Masters, Loranad Warriors with their armor-piercing damage as well. Mumakil routing. Still the Morroquendi bows using those poison projectiles of theirs. Out in the open field over here, the Hobbits still not moving forward, perhaps as a direct result of Lindon being an annoyance. Riders of the Goldenwood from Filler helping out Madexa's Bjornings. Yent's also back here. And it's the sort of thing which could be dealt with a few swift charges from the Horse Lords of Ulmo, so they need to be careful not to be isolated from any support. But still, No great push from the hobbits as of right now. And themselves and Lindon not really committing any infantry units to any kind of engagement just yet. I have to say, I like the way that the red team are trending in this battle, more so than the blue team so far. More Mirkwood units pushing up the hill, Lothlorien. I mean, still holding on, but like I said, by hook or by crook, they are starting to struggle just a little bit more, and they can't commit all of their army up here, otherwise they will well and truly open the door to Mirkwood to start flanking around. The topography of the map being what it is, though, it will take Mirkwood at least a little bit of time before they're able to move forward. The Harad infantry force, I mean, all of the cavalry has now pulled back, so they do still have quite a lot of cavalry, actually, to Harad. But can they utilise it effectively? I mean, they certainly worried Dorwinion, but I don't think they were terribly effective. The ballista moving forward, Harad spearmen are routing. There's still some elements of Harad fast movers down here on the low ground. Looking at the dead bodies that are on the floor, sort of a mix of Harad cavalry and various humans and elves from Dorwinion. Dorwinion actually getting caught up on the Rumokill corpses now. One of those things. Elephant class units do leave a solid entity when they perish, unlike every other kind of unit. Maybe it's for the best that regular infantry don't do such a thing, however. Now Valiant infantry are shaken, getting hit in the back by poison projectiles, javelins, and also engaged in melee against exactly the kind of unit they would have been hoping to avoid in the Lothlorien warriors. So this is where Dorwinion are starting to run up against some significant opposition. Well, victory almost a certainty for the Mirkwood units, though. Dorwinion may be struggling, but Mirkwood definitely picking up the slack here against the Lothlorien resistance that are holding on this hilltop. Thanks to Amenduia, Lorenand, Axemen pushing forwards as well. And yeah, you can see Moragmendi Stalkers moving forward, but Lothlorien really kind of isolating themselves, I think, up on this hilltop. I mean, fortifying this position is all well and good. Dorwinion moving forward with more units. Dorwinion actually now on a level with them as well with the Moragmendi bows, so maybe out of necessity more than anything else, but Lothlorien find themselves a little bit isolated perhaps. They only have this one unit of Watchers of the Golden Wood. There's a lot of Harad cavalry, there's still some Harad infantry as well, but I don't know. Shire shadows, I mean, definitely quite a messy engagement so far, you'd have to say. Still what remains of the Lindon cavalry are here. Dorwinion cavalry as well. Riders of the Golden Wood on their way back to, I guess, try and force these Moragmendi Stalkers away, so Lothlorien at least have the option of retreating down this way should they need to. Yeah, and it's about time that the hobbits started to move forward, I think, given the fact that Lindon are a little bit more scattered. You can see that the Great Eagles clearly going about their business. Back up here, I mean, do Lindon have the ability? I don't think they have the numbers to withstand a full-blooded hobbit assault, and it's something which I think the blue team do seriously need at this point. They need something to try and claim some momentum, because at the moment Lothlorien has sort of been ground down a little bit. Victory still seems certain for Mirkwood. I mean, with Mirkwood having a portion of their army over here, maybe Lothlorien can turn this fight around a little bit, especially with the Dorwinion elements slightly struggling. Mirkwood moving forward just a little bit. Harad with some units caught out in the open by Greenwood Watchers. Haradrim Spearmen and Southron Pikemen when they're caught out of position. Not going to do so well against high quality elven units. Moragmendi Stalkers still doing their thing. Still all of the Riders of the Golden Wood alive. Was that the first one just falling there? No, that's a Moragmendi unit. I think, yeah, 33 is a full unit of Riders of the Golden Wood. Forward come all of the Harad cavalry as well. A singular unit of Spears of Amenduia, turning their backs, interestingly enough. They would have been better off still facing towards the Serpent Guard. Not a devastating charge by any means, but still. Oh, there goes the Mirkwood General. The elves won't be quite so affected by that as the human elements of the Dorwinion army, but that's two red team generals that have fallen. Orquendi bows being committed to melee. Lorien dealing with what remains of the Dorwinion units that were involved in this push. And maybe having a full health Hobbit army is what's going to be the saviour of the blue team's efforts here, because Lorien are definitely inflicting a fair amount of pain on the red team here. I don't know whether or not they'll... I think ultimately they will end up falling by the wayside, but still. 4 Lindon Marines throwing some javelins in, really trying to put the screws to Lorien now. Loren armed axemen acting as the rear guard, although I don't necessarily think they're needed with the cavalry presence over here. One thing that is worth saying as well, I think... Ooh, hello, Great Eagles in and amongst things over here. It has been messy down in this part of the battlefield fairly consistently. Mirkwood having a lot of units still down here, but they're not really doing a great deal. I think, you know, a little bit more decisiveness needed from the red team to really capitalise on the situation they find themselves in. Bit of a weird animation there from the Great Eagles. Haldia falls, as is the custom. Serpent Guard moving forwards. Lindon's still a little bit scattered. The Hobbit's still too static for me as well. That Lindon position could be completely overrun by Medexa if he chose to do so. Still plenty of time left in this battle, though, it is worth saying. Again, it's not the longest battle, but so far we've seen a rather grinding affair. In come the Great Eagles. Again, you can see the evidence of their huge charge damage as they charge into the back of the 4 Lindon Marines. They need to get out of there quickly, though. Spearmen will be effective against them in melee. I guess everything will be effective against them in melee, given they don't have a traditional melee attack, but they do technically count as cavalry. Javelins knocking them out of the sky, but obviously as cavalry means spears are going to be just that little bit more effective against them. And the Great Eagles do completely fall now. Still the battle centred around this hill right in the middle of the map. There's that Mirkwood artillery as well, going after this unit of Loren armed axemen. Just about have the range to hit them. So far only individual units have fallen. Harad's cavalry still making a Mirkwood advance on the low ground to surround Lorien. Kind of impossible really, I suppose. They don't have the massive spears to confidently withstand any Harad charges. That means Lorien's still able to put up effective resistance here on the high ground, but that will be coming to an end soon. With Lindon as well. Both Lindon and Mirkwood have been putting pressure on. I mean, in Harad's case, they haven't really been able to come to their aid because of the composition being so cavalry-centric. In the Hobbit's case, I think they either needed to go to Lorien's aid quicker or go on the offensive a little bit quicker. The Ents coming in. They'll make pretty quick work of these 4 Lindon archers. There's also the Mithlon Marines there, but the rest of the Hobbit army coming forward. I mean, it is a big army that the Hobbits still have, and it is a lot of effort that the Red team have already put into this battle in trying to dislodge the Blue team from the centre of the map. With Harad cavalry still present on the field as well, perhaps the Blue team will be in the ascendancy. Noldorin Blade Masters moving forward, they are the ideal answer really from a Lindon perspective to a unit like the Ents. Pikes slightly less so. In Silmarillion they are technically elephant class units, whereas in Reforged they are technically infantry units, so the pikes will not be as effective here. Battling Brandy Bucks are here, some slightly depleted Mithlon Marines trying to do some damage to them on the advance, but this is exactly what I would have liked to see, maybe slightly sooner, but it's not too late by any means for the Blue team to really start putting the screws to this wing of the Lindon army. That's probably one of the Serpent Guard, yes it is, moving very quickly. Plenty of numbers now being applied to the situation, looking like we've got an awful lot of routing units here from the Red team. 4 Lindon archers on their way forward. The Red team certainly need to win this battle for this hilltop over here and have something to show for all of their efforts, but even still, Lorien putting up some very good resistance. With the Watchers of the Golden Wood, it's not going to be easy for the Red team to dislodge Lorien from this hilltop. we look elsewhere, Demons of the Desert are in position, offering some support. Don't know what that ballista is going after. Mirkwood may be future-proofing slightly by having the potential for a final stand over on this little hilltop, but I don't know if they've got enough necessarily for that. They can certainly ward off cavalry charges. They've still got some spears of Emondweir as well, but I'm not liking the way that this battle is developing for the red team. Morocco Stalks are still there. Dorwinion coming back for round 3, I guess, against Lothlorien on this hilltop. If all Lindon archers are over here. Victory, a distinct possibility for Lothlorien now as well, which is exactly the sort of thing which the red team didn't need to see. They needed this battle. If any battle was going to go well, they really did need it to be this one. Over here, bandits moving forward from Medexa. Banderbrass archers offering their support as well. Yeah, and Lindon, I should say, being utterly overwhelmed. Bandits under normal circumstances may not be the answer to Lothlorien Blade Masters, but on this occasion it is. Overwhelming numbers from the hobbits. The hobbits with their armour piercing, like I said, in the composition phase as well, not traditionally the sort of thing which is going to work out particularly well against Lindon. I think actually the hobbits are sending over quite a lot of their forces actually just completely ignoring this Lindon resistance. Lindon may actually be able to fight their way out of this situation as a result of that, but they will have taken an awful lot of damage while doing so, and it does of course mean that hobbit reinforcements will be on the way to try and relieve the beleaguered Lothlorien defenders on that hilltop. We'll wait and see what the Harad cavalry does as well. We are into the final 10,000 frames now. Over here, Serpent Guard are running. Southron Lancers moving forward. Mirkwood pushing back against the Harad cavalry presence here. Still some units in the background, there's still some Morocco Stalkers. And the rest of the Harad cavalry, I mean Southron Lancers, some very depleted Black Serpents. Mirkwood, I think out of necessity, they feel the need to do something here because of the losses incurred elsewhere. It does look as though finally, well, there goes the Harad general. Being that the rest of their army is cavalry, I don't think that will be too much of a problem, but finally Lothlorien are being defeated. It's come at a very substantial cost. We'll see if the hobbits' decision to start making their way over here with a large portion of their army and not finishing off that Lindon resistance on the side of the map proves to be the right call. Lots of damage that Lothlorien have inflicted upon their foes, and now it will be up to their allies, primarily you'd have to say the Shire, to make good on these gains. Proudfoot Protector still alive, Farmers of Buckland are there. Marsh Ones of the Wood are routing. Meanwhile, Lindon are going to be victorious over here. I can't help but feel as though this was a bit of a mistake. I mean, given the fact that the hobbits waited so long to move forward in the first place, they really ought to have focused their efforts over here in dismantling this Lindon resistance first before moving on, I think. But as a result, Lindon are going to have a victory over here, a Pyrrhic victory, but that's still something that the red team can hold on to as the game comes into its final stages. Still an Ent left alive, which is kind of impressive given the presence of the Lothlorien Blade Masters. In fact, many Ents left alive. Primarily going after the Lothlorien Blade Masters, I'm not sure is a particularly great idea, but it is what it is. As more hobbits arrive, whoever wins over here is going to have a Pyrrhic victory on their hands, but with another unit of Farmers of Buckland, maybe that will be enough to tilt the odds in the blue team's favour on the side of the map there. I don't think there was any need for it to be such a nail-biter for the blue team, like I said, but you can see now that the hilltop position that Lothlorien were fortifying, the red team themselves can now claim the centre of the map for their own. The Southron Lancers are here, going to charge in. As I mentioned, low tier Lancers like this not necessarily going to have the biggest of impacts, and indeed you can see that as evidence. The Woodland Protectors withstanding that charge fairly easily, and then they can use their spears to good effect in melee as well. Ballista moving forward, I mean they are going to try and post the Ballista up on this hilltop. I think they've put so much into taking this hill away from Lothlorien that fortifying it with artillery does make sense. That will be the Lindon general. I mean, I guess Lindon, with as it wears on into the final stages, even Elven factions can suffer from the lack of a general with those morale hits. And the rest of Lindon's units are going to be basic as far as Elven units go. Southland Lancers broken and fighting to the death. Moving all of their units across from here now. Riders of the Golden Wood still very much alive, full health in fact. I don't know how useful cavalry is going to be though in trying to dislodge the red team from the position they are currently taking up, but it's better than nothing. Lothlorien armed archers as well, so Lothlorien not a completely spent force yet. Harad still have some cavalry, but I think you have to say I'm not entirely convinced that the Harad composition has paid off here. If the blue team do go on to win, I don't think it will be as a result of Harad going cavalry heavy. I think it will be in spite of that. There are the Riders of the Golden Wood. I mean, they could certainly charge into the Woodland Protectors and do the business, I think. And they may as well do so before the Woodland Protectors start to fortify the hilltop position. Some javelin volleys. Finally, they are going to be taking losses, and it comes as a result of needless commitments of units, really. Let's have a look over here. So yeah, the Hobbits ultimately are victorious. Those additional farmers of Buckland doing the business, and they will be able to send over more units now as the Hobbits begin to stack up way over here. So they are going to be sort of using the terrain as cover. Spears of Amenduir moving around. What is going to be the play here? I mean, having a look, yeah, I mean the blue team certainly have the edge when it comes to percentages, and I do think that the damage that Lothlorien inflicted earlier on in the battle is going to prove to be fairly terminal for the red team's chances. They are setting up in a very defensive position. Maybe the artillery can make the difference. I think we are going to have to actually go up to ×6 speed here, interestingly enough. It is going to be one big strike we're going to see to end the battle, I believe. Really try and consolidate their forces around this ballista. I think that is the way. Or are they going to try and move it? A player admits defeat. I don't know who that would be, necessarily. Dorwinion? I don't think it was Dorwinion, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, they still had some Helvelan infantry that could have been used to good effect. Going to try and move down here. It's a bit of a bizarre end to the battle. Are we actually going to see a proper end to the battle? I hope so. The Ents moving in, but they're going to be killed off really very quickly. Ballista, is it going to start firing? I'm not sure that this battle even has enough frames left. A player admits defeat. It's arriving. It is only, well, I think it was Harad that admitted defeat just then. And the Brass Archers, I mean, we are going to see a full assault from the Hobbits now, I think. Some Archwarns of the Wood are still alive. Killing off that ballista crew with archers. Lothlorien archers across the way as well. I mean, it's very clear that the blue team are going to win. It's just by what manner that victory comes. Whether it will be a final stand from the red team or whether they will throw in the towel before then. Based on the amount of frames left, I'm not sure which one it will be. Riders of the Golden Wood are there, bandits stacking up, hobbits moving across to this side. What's going on here? This isn't the end of the battle I was expecting. I was expecting a full-blooded assault and then the red team ultimately coming up short. That may still prove to be the case, but it's been a rather pedestrian end to the game, unfortunately. With the hobbits, as they have done throughout the entire battle, really, dawdling. A little bit disappointing to see. using a lot of their archers. I mean, this is fair enough, I suppose, setting up this crossfire. But no infantry as of yet, just the Tookish hunters and the Banderbras archers peppering this position. Mirkwood and Lindon, two factions which are not going to do so well under this kind of pressure. Softening them up for the kill, I suppose. Some hobbits moving forward. Battling brandy bucks and farmers of Buckland doing the business. Defeat seems certain, only a military genius could win this battle. Turkish hunters biding their time. Most of the hobbits moving forward. We are seeing a genuine engagement now, I suppose, with the hobbits attacking with infantry on all fronts. A bizarre and slightly slow end to the battle, which is a shame considering we kind of know what way the battle is going as well, but even so, I think this battle does go to show a few things, which we'll talk about in the endgame splash screen, I think, as the hobbits will send their team over the edge here. Victory will be theirs. Bandits doing their thing. Banderbras archers climbing the hill. Ballista firing away. Yeah, they needed the ballista really to be the thing which saved them, and it's not ultimately going to work out that way for the red team. The hobbits still have far too much in the way of numbers and directions in which their assault can progress. And this is going to be the end. Still a fair amount of hobbits as well, but we'll talk about the reasons for that as soon as the battle does come to its ultimate end. Lindon are gone, so Mirkwood the last one standing of the red team. And there we have it. Hobbitry in arms. A bit of a bizarre one on a map that we've never seen. And as I was saying, I really do think that the central hill where Lothlorien were making their stand, they got a lot of kills, as you can see, and that's part of the problem here. The red team committed so much to that hilltop that they needed it to be an engagement which went in their favour, and ultimately, while they did technically have victory over Lothlorien in the end, it ended up costing them far, far too much. And as a result, they didn't have the ability to withstand the inevitable assault that was going to come from the hobbits eventually. I do think Medexa was maybe a little bit overcautious in this fight, and in a different situation that could have cost the blue team, but ultimately, too much in the way of manpower in the late game. Dorwinion really struggled in their initial assault. Mirkwood had more success, but still too many losses suffered at the hands of Lothlorien. Harad actually got a fair amount of kills in the end, but it was kind of difficult to follow how effective they were being, to be honest. I still think maybe victory in spite of the cavalry heavy army is being a little bit harsh on what Morris was actually achieving in this battle, but I still think that basic cavalry like Southron Lancers, regular Serpent Guard, in this version of the game, when you bring cavalry heavy armies like that, it is very difficult to make the most of them, especially when they're as relatively fragile as most of the options that Harad's cavalry gives you. But I suppose that just means that Morris played well, in spite of his own composition, really, and actually used them fairly effectively. But yeah, I think the blue team were worthy victors here. The red team, they wanted to take that central hill. It ended up costing them too much, and yeah, the blue team were able to ride that to victory, as it were. Let's see what did the damage for Filla's army. Yeah, Watchers of the Golden Wood at range, and then in melee as well, proving to be a real obstacle for the red team to try and get past. March Wardens doing well. Riders of the Golden Wood doing quite well as well. They were full health for quite a while in this battle. In the late game, they were a little bit more difficult to use, but still. Woodland Protectors, one of them getting over 200 kills. Lauren Armed Warriors getting over 200 kills. Several units breaking that 200 kills limit, which in a pitch battle is obviously very, very impressive, as much as they were acting more as a defender on a pitch battle, Lothlorien, given the position they took up. But still, you can only beat what's put in front of you, and Filler certainly managed to do that with a lot of his units there in a very good defensive position. And yeah, that's pretty much it. This was a slightly shorter battle, I suppose, than the large-scale sieges we've seen in series up till this point, but obviously a decent palate cleanser as a pitch battle, especially on maps that we've never seen. That's why I wanted to do this one, obviously, in spite of the fact there wasn't really too much of a theme to this one that I can put forward. It's a new map is always good to see, a fresh map to the channel anyway. I wouldn't call this one new. I think this one's been in the game for some time after all. But yes, the same things apply. I won't take up too much time talking about that on the endgame splash screen this time. Live stream channel update will be happening at some point in the summer, as soon as I'm fully aware of what's going to be happening. As far as what else is going to be coming up in the coming week or so, there hopefully will be another one of the knockout tourney battles. It'll be some manner of infantry. I think I'm leaning more towards shielded infantry at this point. So that will be on the way, and still more replays will be coming as well. I've got a few more large-scale sieges on Reforged. I've got a battle from the RP campaign from Silmarillion, which will be also upcoming in the next fortnight or so, and that will be sort of the near future plans that we have. But yeah, irregardless, enough of my rambling. Big thank you to Filler and all the players that were a part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.